filmmaking, and as well, it's like just a general bird's eye view of how to unlock and understand what sound is capable of in cinema, and how that relates to our physical bodies, our evolution, and also attempting to give a greater insight into what goes in constructing these experiences from practitioners like myself. So yeah, I'm gonna start with a little sound effect. Two sounds here. The first one we're hearing is from the original Twin Peaks pilot. And then, of course, we have this sound, which is kind of a train horn, foghorn hybrid thing that Alan Splett and David Lynch kind of crafted for Eraserhead, and then it gets used in other films as well. So we look to cinema for an experience. In my opinion, this supersedes even character and narrative. After all, we have like the birth of cinema being with films like the Lumiere brothers would make, like The Arrival of a Train to a Station, which historically was this sort of experience event of moving pictures that we have the French train arriving at a train station, and famously the anecdote goes that theater goers were kind of shocked at the sort of experience of seeing actual movement reproduced, that some of them thought the train was going to come through the wall of the cinema. Probably not exactly in that fashion, but I think it was the shock of seeing something that hadn't existed and then seeing it exists is such a fundamental human thing that we experience in our lifetimes. And I think over the course of working in this medium, I've found that the best directors have a desire and an ability to impart a strong feeling. That seems to be the common goal of these people, is they're desiring to get something across, to reach out and physically move molecules in audience members. Now, this is a phrase that I've heard, and I continually hear with virtually every, I'll say, successful director in terms of somebody who knows what they're doing. It's a phrase that happens at some point of the process when talking about a specific sonic moment in their film, whether it be like a punch, an explosion, or simply the tranquility of like evening crickets. I usually hear this phrase, I really want to feel it. And again, I think that relates to this idea of imparting an experience. So we're going to talk about language really quickly. And it's kind of why I chose the title of this lecture, Lonesome Foghorn Blows, because it's a great example of a Lynchian sound without even hearing anything. The phrase kind of sets an immediate somber and atmospheric tone with a poetic turn of phrase. But language is an incredibly effective way to reach inside someone and create a soundtrack by choosing how you describe something, the way in which you describe it, the lyricism and poetry of a variety of different languages from countries. There's ways to sort of spark something inside all of us. So we'll start with, this is actually a little snippet of the script from Twin Peaks Season 3. I just have this one because this is one of the Lynch projects that I worked on. But this excerpt actually ends up not playing out in the manner it's written here, but I wanted to present it because it's a really cool idea. And in some ways, revisiting this and seeing this, I was thinking, oh darn, we should have done that, because it's a very interesting, efficient little sequence here. I'll read it. So this is happening in Cooper's double cell in South Dakota prison, Buckhorn, where he's captured, and they're sort of holding him, sort of not knowing what's going on, figuring out who he is and everything. It says, slow push in on Cooper's double in his bunk listening. We hear everything he hears, but the sounds begin to thin out. First footsteps, then any ambient prison sounds, then voices, until we hear only many little tones, beeps, and codes. So again, didn't really transition to the actual finished product, but it's an interesting way of seeing how Lynch and on this project's case, Mark Frost as well, were kind of crafting a sonic experience from ground zero. So it's crucial to remember that the concept of sound design for story is not necessarily a technical craft. It doesn't have to be. Some of the best laid sonic plans start on the script page in the manner which the story is told. Going back hundreds of years to the idea of haiku, Japanese poetry, you can see here this is kind of like an early example of this kind of collision of language to create punctuation, to create sound effect, to kind of conjure sound in a reader. Again, this sort of will kind of flow into Eisenstein's idea of editing and colliding shots, creating meaning between putting two shots together. And I have like a really good example of this. It's a non-David Lynch example, but I have to show this because it just is kind of perfect in bridging the idea of haiku, Eisenstein, and cinema. But this next example is from the original Alien script that Walter Hill shepherded from Dan O'Bannon, and I'm blanking on the other screenwriter's name, but he did a rewrite on the script, and Walter Hill has been quoted famously for kind of being influenced by haiku and trying to work that into the script form. So we're just going to see how this kind of transfers into a screenplay form. And I'm going to be quiet for a moment and let people kind of digest at least a little portion of this. It does something to your mind. You'll feel the montage, you'll feel the rhythm, you'll hear the sounds and experience the percussiveness of what will be the shots. So very, very cool thing there. And that, again, that's 1979. So we've just leapfrogged over Eraserhead there. But a fantastic film, fantastic script, a well-laid plan on how to get to the successful mood of that film. I'm going to race through the advent and inception of the history of sound for film here, but I wanted to point out just a few things that kind of crystallize concepts and techniques. So you've got like film sound kind of stumbling really early on in the game, and I think it's I could have clipped in here a scene from Singing in the Rain. There's the famous scene where they're showing the floundering of early Hollywood's transition from silence to talkies, and they're hiding mics and dresses, and it's awful. Like, because the idea is they have to photograph being the sound and the picture together, and so that means they have to record it all at once. And they had these giant soundproof booths on set where the sound mixer recordist was in there, ensuring that things, and they would go through long troughs of cables across the studio lot into a center facility with like these big things that transduced audio energy into light and then was photographed onto an optical track. I mean, it was a whole crazy thing. So it took a little minute before I think people were able to sort of unlock what a creative use of sound, because they were kind of shackled in the beginning to a real pragmatic sense of this idea of synchronized sound, and it became sort of funneled into the, dialogue. How can we hear everybody and everything? So Singing in the Rain, again, that's a great example of that little moment in time. I wanted to highlight this one. Not a lot of people talk about this film. It's not a crazy film, but there is a really incredible little montage moment in the film, a little sequence, and it's really kind of the only of its kind in the whole film, really. The rest of the film plays like every other film in the 30s. It's kind of primarily scenes with characters talking and almost like theatrical blocking, and it has symphonic score just here and there, almost like a sitcom to kind of just bring thematic mood and elevate energy. But we're going to look at this scene, and it's not only is it a great sort of psychological use of sound to create a mood, but it really echoes some of what Lynch does to come.
Positively indecent.
Look where he did to me.
Your conduct was disgusting. It isn't done. It isn't done. Strangle. Strangle. Indecent. Indecent. And a man dying of thirst. Forget water. Disgusting. You're mad. Mad.
Come back soon, won't you? Come back. Come back.
Yeah, so great example here. It's doing everything in that scene is meant to be subjective. Like in the beginning, the little trick photography of making it look like, he's looking in the mirror. We are the character. Everything is putting us in that seat. It's jacking us into his viewpoint. And so as it transitions to the sort of dreamscape, all those characters and thought, it's meant to be like we're in his mind, we're experiencing that, and the sonics are doing everything to support that. But subjective use of cinema, incredible. Then 2 years later, what we have is probably the equivalent of like a Star Wars in 1933 with King Kong, and this movie is really ground zero of what's considered sound design, because what happens is finally the technology allows for the sound and picture to be recorded separately. They can record sound effects and they can combine them and mix them together, music, dialogue, and special sound effects into a final print master. And so the term re-recording mixer, which is still used today, is where this comes from, because you have the mixer recording all the production audio, but then you have a re-recording mixer who's recording all of the elements together and combining them. So that is King Kong is ground zero of modern sound design. And we're going to hear from the sound engineer, the sound designer, Murray Spivak. And, it's a great example of like, he has to create the sound of Kong because, a giant gorilla doesn't exist in reality. And here we have a filmmaker who's bringing this to the screen via special effects and miniature. And what does that sound like? And he has to do that. So, going to the zoo and recording, kind of real world elements, but then slowing the recordings down, playing them at a different speed, a slower speed than they were recorded, can do these magical things, reversing these things so they sort of smear reality, and it makes it next door to familiar. And, these are two of the most important techniques, I would say, pitching down and reversing audio, because these will become incredible, like Lynchian techniques to help him craft otherworldly sounds.
I found that if I lowered an octave, it would be at half speed. Then I took a tiger roar, and then I put that backwards against the lion roar. You couldn't detect what it was, and we knew there was no bass singer that could sing that low, so I knew that I was on the right track.
Murray Spivak. He was also a professional drummer. Okay, so we're going to jump forward here, but I just wanted to draw a quick line between these two things. Lowering the pitch of a recording, extremely effective way to instantly turn anything Lynchian. And this is a tool, this kind of King Kong energy type tool that he kind of would employ to kind of make things sound larger than life and give them a sense of weight and mood beyond their normal thing. So here's, I'm going to show 3 clips here. The first one is the main titles for Inland Empire. The second is a clip from Twin Peaks season 3. We're going to hear like a pop song that's slowed down. And then the third thing is Backyard at the Iguana from Wild at Heart, with the introduction of Bobby Peru's character. Daily weather reports up in his painting studio, right? And actually the sound of that tone that opens Inland Empire is he built a wooden contraption that had his web camera on, and he would lower it down every day to do the weather report, and then he would raise it back up to get it out of the way. And when the wood lowered, there was this characteristic kind of like little animal like. And what we did is just record that sound and slow it down 2 octaves, and you get this giant scape, like impending size and mass on that quality. I'll play it again so you can hear it. This song is it's by a Nashville duo, these 2 girls. It's a pop song. It sounds nothing like this at full speed, but we half sped it, and all of a sudden it's just the women, including male voices, almost like, disturbed and distorted voices, and of course the beat sound giant.
Bobby. Hey, Sailor, Lula. This here is the man himself. Bobby is Sailor and Lula, 2 most recent strandees, the economic variety.
Bobby Peru, just like the country.
So we're going to listen to this. This is actually normal speed. This was the soundtrack of the previous scene. So you hear how this transforms. This is just the same version off the record. So you can see just instantly, like in Pro Tools, it's just a command space bar, shift space bar that will instantly play a song at half the speed it was recorded at. It's an incredibly simple, powerful technique that evokes that kind of King Kong energy where it's just like, whoa, you know? Music recorded in with modern physics in normal time does not sound like that. So we're going to talk about the origins of David forming. What makes him him? Where did his influences come from? So again, just to set up a time frame here, this kind of a period of time between the mid-'60s and 1970 where he enrolls in Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art. As many of you know who've heard about him and the lore behind him, Philadelphia is where many of the Eraserhead sort of feelings and experiences come from to inform that film. He arrives at university simply as an artist who's interested in painting. He has an experience while working on a painting where a figure in a garden at night starts to emerge out of the image, and he hears a wind that sort of evokes the character to move before his eyes. It kind of like just a kind of a moment, a glimmering of kind of a premonition, and that's where I think his version of the cinema is born. And he's later quoted as saying, he describes movies and cinema as paintings that move with sound. So I think that's interesting to see how he comes to formulate and think about this very medium. And then, you know, during this time, and this is my own kind of conjecture based on like what he would talk to me about and what he said in an interview, but I feel like his whole sonic world becomes formed in his approach by during this key time by like a trio of particular formative filmmakers and influences, and that kind of starts the building blocks, just the few building blocks that he needs to start building where he needs to go. So again, this is sort of my own sort of conjecture here, but after thinking about this for years, I mean, look at these film dates where he sort of experienced these films for the first time. I kind of have this theory that like every artist, there's like this ripe formative time where the influences that come during that time period where they're forming, they crystallize and harden into concrete, and that sort of makes up the molecular structure of who somebody is at the core, what their first steps are, what they learned early on. So we have Fellini, and you know his use of wind was very, very overt, and you know he didn't use it for realism. It wasn't real sounding wind, but he used it to signify like this kind of dreamlike, surreal experience in his films. And another key thing is he used it as a transition to, like, when you hear that wind, we know we're inside the mind of the character. That's the auditory clue that reality has blurred, and now we're experiencing things more subjectively through that character's subjectivity. But check out this. With each of these examples, I've kind of picked a filmmaker's example and then an example from David to just kind of illustrate.
Susi, la tua maestra, ascoltala, seguila. Giulietta, che fai?
Okay, so next up we have Jacques Tati, who I don't think anybody would necessarily think of his use of sound as Lynchian, but there are examples. David was a huge fan of his stuff, and this concept of him using room tones and using the sound of electricity in playtime to kind of give this sort of comically oppressive concept of, an aging man in the sense of this ever increasingly crazy modernity that was being experienced at the time in France. And but also just from a very basic sense, Tati would use sound to amplify on-screen gags, jokes. He would crank up Foley unusually loud, and it gave just a sense of kind of a skewed reality and in a elevated sense of comedy. But listen to that guy's feet. It's like your eye goes right to him. Characters all across the board, but your eye goes right to the person whose sound we're hearing. And this is just a crossover here. I always feel like the Red Room. It's Jacques Tati's sense of Foley.
Ganger.
These are the room tones I was kind of talking about.
Deux. Non. 3, 2. Oui.
Non, à droite. Oh non, écoute, encore. Là, autre fois. Comme ça va.
I have to apologize again for the fluorescent lights. I think it's a bad transformer.
That's quite all right.
Yeah, so moving on, we've got Kubrick, who, Lynch was an unequivocal fan of. When I worked up there, David would fondly, we screened, when he got a new digital projector, 2001 was the first movie he wanted to screen, and had all of us employees come in to his theater after hours and screen this off of a Blu-ray. And I think he screened Lolita, Barry Lyndon. He just loved everything Kubrick did. And I think Kubrick showed for the world of cinema and continues to do. I feel like I saw an interview yesterday where, for Paul Thomas Anderson's new movie, where Leonardo DiCaprio and Benicio Toro were talking about Kubrick. And he just continues to inspire, and but the things he established, especially in 2001, incredible stuff that all to service mood, and he was also one of these guys who was interested in a subjective experience. That was his primary motive. The great quote, which hits the viewer at an inner level of consciousness, just as music does. And I think 2001 is the perfect example of an experiential musical film. It moves like music. Heat, Michael Mann also talks about Heat as being, he plotted the whole thing out like a piece of symphonic music, where to be quiet, where to be loud, where to be quiet again. So interesting stuff, but I love this particular one, this mashup here. Listen to this. So very similar ways at getting at the same thing there. And, you know, it's not something where you see Eraserhead and you think, oh, 2001, you know, but very similar films, and in the way that sound is utilized, getting at this musicality of the film's experience. I think that films are very similar. And of course, famously, there's the anecdote where when David was working on The Elephant Man, he was filming The Elephant Man at Pinewood Studios, and there was some crossover crew that were Kubrick's people. And they said, David, guess what? We just went to Stanley's house last night for a screening of one of his favorite films, and guess what it was? And David said, what? And he said, Eraserhead. And, you know, David's anecdote is like, I just about died and went to heaven. You know, just the idea of one filmmaker sort of loving and relating to another filmmaker's work is like the highest form of compliment. But I think, you know, that just shows there's a reason for that. There's a reason why Kubrick was like, this is my person, you know, like these are my people who talk in this way. So again, like, that's David's version of, you know, this quote of to impart an experience. This is David's way of saying he wants to create a world and let people get lost in there. So let's look at Eraserhead, because this is really the blueprint that you can overlay on every subsequent Lynch work in terms of understanding his use of sound, because it's the blueprint of where all these techniques happen and where he has a discovery and thinks that's a tool, catalog it. That's a tool, catalog it. And we're going to look at the origins of these. So again, like this is where, you know, he meets Alan when he's still in Philadelphia. Their first project is The Grandmother, which is kind of prototypical Eraserhead in terms of the sounds. That's their crash course working together. Famously, Alan started playing them sound effects records. That's how they had sound effects for media and film at the time, is they'd store them on records. And after searching through some records, David's like, no, like none of these are what I'm after. So Alan says, well, we're going to have to record all the ones that you're after then. And they set about just trying things, experimenting. And look at the time frame there. You know, 63 days at 9 hours, they developed their whole sort of working relationship. They're having discoveries together, so there's a lot of unspoken simpatico going on. So in 70, they both moved to L.A., they enroll in AFI. Lynch is a student, but Alan actually is a head of the sound department there. So yeah, everything that they work on with Eraserhead, these things that they develop, things like drone, the sort of pervasive low frequency tones that they use to kind of have a sense of unease and also ramp anxiety when needed. There are these sort of consistent tones that I like to think them as almost like scene bullies, like they're there staring at you sonically as a way of like, okay, enough, but it's that sound pressure level coming out through the speakers that's giving a sort of a bullying sense. It's pushing air at you. They're taking familiar sounds and exaggerating them for their musical qualities. So think back to that train horn, that foghorn train horn hybrid that we heard at the very beginning. It's a familial sound, but it gets kind of extracted musically, where it becomes a musical device. Another technique of expanding the world outside of the visible frame. This is a huge one, I think, for filmmakers. Is, you know, sometimes you're dealing with building 3 walls and a floor. You have a set with no ceiling, and you're filming a scene there. But maybe it's a sci-fi movie, or it's a fantasy movie where you use sound to evoke the production value that's happening beyond the stuff that you maybe can't afford to shoot or whatever, and that expands that world sonically. Music is treated and cut like a sound effect. This is something that I saw David do on Twin Peaks season 3 with taking Penderecki music and chopping it up, and it's something that virtually no other filmmaker I've witnessed doing. I mean, I'm sure that they exist, but because it's a very like ham-fisted and sort of arrogant way at like chopping something up, and but David would just treat music like it was a sound effect. I like this bit. I want to slam that here, and then I want to overlay 2 bits on top of each other so it sounds even more crazy. You know, he would do stuff like that, and it's a very like collage-based sort of get in there with your hands and make it do what you want it to do, not just like, well, this works here, you know. And of course, he writes In Heaven, the sort of like signature musical set piece in the film, which, again, think back to the full circle and him ending on Twin Peaks season 3 with all of those musical performances. You know, that becomes a kind of a thing. So yeah, here's a little organ drone example montage here.
Did you and Mary have sexual intercourse?
So again, back to the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde example, we have this is all subjective use of sound. It's not like, you know, the character staring at the mirror, we're the character, but all these tonalities are painting the internal subjective emotional state of the character. You have this kind of pastoral, beautiful example of him, you know, I forget if this is a fantasy or not, but having a relationship with a woman, like kind of dream sequence where they're kind of lowering into this milk-like substance. You know, when he sees, you know, the baby with the fever, we echo that sort of organ sustain here with the horror of seeing her with another man. It's all his experience. Okay, so again, great quote from David on making Eraserhead, and moving forward, I want to say that famously, you know, Lynch is an instinctual artist. He doesn't put an importance on why he's being led somewhere or feeling compelled to put a sound here or this piece of music there. It's not a why thing for him. It's a feeling thing. But what I came to understand and formulate during my time with him is that there were explanations for certain techniques and why he was using them and why he gravitated to them and why they worked. And that became my sort of thing and, you know, what I'm talking about here. But again, I think some people kind of get tripped up of like, oh, David intended to use a B-flat minor organ drone because it connects to this or that. That's not David's approach. It's not a cerebral thing. It's a heart-based thing. And this is a segue for what I call the physiology of sound. It's actually an older idea that has bounced around filmmaking for the 100 years or so that it's existed, that the real movie is not actually happening on screen, but the real movie is happening inside the minds of the audience, and it's happening in the brain. So what occurs on the screen serves merely as a trigger impulse for inducing a mental representation. So think back to that idea of language and haiku, creating sounds in our minds. It's what cinema is doing, is triggering physiological responses in some ways. So again, successfully giving some people an experience through the screen, engaging and activating certain buttons we have programmed inside us from across eons of time. Our bodies are a structure, and we have mechanisms that are directly related and responsible for the human experience. The more we understand how it works, better filmmakers we can become. Sound is a big part of how we behave as animals, and many of these oral mechanisms that are in place are there to help us survive and stay safe. So think about how sound informs our earliest experiences. It's the very first sense plugged into us as human beings. Around 6-7 months in the womb, we're hearing our mother's heartbeat. We're hearing breathing. We're hearing sounds of the outside world come through filtered. It's like an underwater sound through layers of membrane and skin. It's an experience of trying. It's our first experience of trying to make sense of the world and information that's coming in. And this is all before we even emerge into the world. It's fascinating thing. So yeah, getting to understand how the mechanisms work. I got this cool little dated film here, and let's take a look at that.
As the hammer strikes the gong, molecules of air are set into waves or patterns of motion. These waves act upon the ear, which then transmits nerve impulses to the brain. Sound waves enter the ear through an external opening. As the eardrum vibrates, it moves the chain of 3 tiny bones connected with it. In this view, we're looking into the middle ear. The semi-transparent membrane vibrating at the lower left is the eardrum. The bones connected with it are the middle ear bones. This is the sound that is causing the eardrum to vibrate. Here is a close view of the inner ear.
I'll skip ahead, but didn't that look like a fucking scene from Eraserhead, that inner ear? That's happening inside every single one of us, you know? A great quote from French filmmaker and theoretician Robert Bresson. I think it's a conceptual idea of the eyes kind of drawing us outward, but somehow the ears and the way we intuit and understand its input kind of can help us draw inward. So yeah, this is the sort of trick of cinema. And this is, I think, where David would exploit that. And, you know, with things like Mulholland Drive and even Twin Peaks: The Return, sometimes you get these seemingly disconnected scenes. We're jumping from one thing to another, concepts and well, who is this character and what's happening here? It's this sort of thing where you throw things up on the screen and the brain just desperately attempts to make sense of it. And this, again, back to the Eisensteinian connection, you throw up 2 shots and your brain is going to try to make sense of it. You show, Alfred Hitchcock has a great example of, like, there's a shot of him expressionless, and then you show a shot of a woman on a picnic blanket with her baby, cuts back to Alfred Hitchcock, he starts slowly smiling, and the idea formed between that collision is that he's a warm, gentle, kind man. If you replace the shot with the baby with a woman undressing, that same shot of Alfred Hitchcock, nothing has changed. All of a sudden, he's a dirty old man. And that's cinema, you know, that collision and making the brain activate and saying, now, wait a second. You know, it just sort of triggers that sort of judgmental sort of assimilation of information. And, you know, this kind of transitions into the sounds beyond the frame of the film. This kind of also links back to the Eraserhead clip. It's like kind of a further example of showing how the environment beyond the film's frame, can speak and lift the performance of characters by, echoing their emotional state, giving us that subjective perspective.
Well, printing's your business, huh? Plumbing's mine. 30 years. I've seen this neighborhood change from pastures to the hellhole it is now. I'd put every damn pipe in this neighborhood.
Dad.
Dale,
And people think pipes grow in their home. Well, they sure as hell don't. Look at my knees. Look at my knees.
Dale,
Are you hungry?
Dale.
I feel like any pedestrian director that directed that scene would see it one-dimensionally and tell the actors, you're screaming at each other, you've got intense energy. But I think a great filmmaker sees that there's other tools available some that scene, that firewalking scene that we just saw, and a lot of the sounds are sort of again, maybe a pedestrian director would just use some intense music or whatever. And although we do have music in there, what's he doing? That's like a classical piece of music, like a stock classical track that he's reversed, and a lot of those descending tones that you hear throughout in the background of that scene, it's a reversed piece of classical music. So you get this thing that you can't put your finger on. It sounds unidentifiable. And again, back to that King Kong technique, just, you take a track and reverse it, and all of a sudden, things that naturally crescendo are now decrescendoing against the laws of physics in a very bizarre way, and it just kind of throws your brain for a loop. So let's talk about fear here. Sound simply travels through 5 nerves, and it uses an alarm mechanism. And this is designed to kind of move the body into flight. So even before the brain has a chance to interpret what's going on, we have what's known as the startle reflex, which is supposedly the fastest thought you can have. If somebody makes an extremely loud noise behind me, I would instantly, without thinking, my muscles would react because I've got that hardwire physiology between my ears and the sound pressure level, and it says when it gets loud, there's danger nearby, and I recoil, I react. So here we have all of this stuff, designed to keep us alive, but these are all buttons, these are all faders on the sort of grand Oz, like console of, I want you to feel this, I want you to feel that. And we get into nonlinear sound here, which is a fancy word for distortion. They're sound waves that are beyond the sort of flat response of what something is capable of reproducing, whether it be an instrument, a musical instrument, or a medium, a recorded medium like analog tape or a preamp or etc. So, the best example is you got a trumpet, you blow it gently, a nice pleasant, round tone comes out. You blow it a little louder, it's the same pleasant tone that's louder. But when you really cram that air across through the trumpet cavern, you get something that at a certain point will start to sound really unpredictable because it's a non-linear waveform. It will jump around and the sound does unpredictable things. And the human brain has an interesting relationship to non-linear sound. which we're going to see here. So the best example of nonlinear sound is from the voice's perspective of the scream. Here's a little clip. First, we're going to hear a trail cam. Does everybody know what a trail cam is? It's a video that they, like a webcam or something, they put in the forest to kind of track animals. And sometimes you get like animals doing more naturalistic things than if humans were around, because the cameras are going 24/7 and they can capture these things. So this is a trail cam recording of a fox scream. So you've got, in the animal kingdom, the sort of the scream is like a klaxon alarm. It's like something that's meant to, if one of the young of an animal is making that sound, then the mother is going to instinctively react and try to protect and save the youth. It's an alarm sound to motivate, to throw into action. And then, of course, you've got like Cheryl Lee, who has an incredible scream. But notice with that clip from Cheryl, the recording of the scream has been pushed to distort. So you've got the natural raspiness of the scream, but what we did in the mix was distort that even further, which gives, like, it basically is just MSG to kind of turn that scream up a little bit more and give it sort of an elevated sense of danger. And so what's happening is there's an audible distortion on that recording that isn't super detectable in context, but you can kind of hear it if you listen for it. And it's all this unconscious informing that, okay, that sound is dangerous, it's loud, it's a form of terror, that character is going through something incredibly torturous. And then in terms of the medium and how distortion works with the medium of recorded audio, you've got a history of vacuum tubes and really limited recorded medium that had very shallow ceilings to where they would fall apart. Think back to the trumpet. But if you overloaded analog equipment, if you overloaded circuitry, it would break up. And again, I think looking back in time, it's very cool because I think mediums are kind of defined by their upper limits. And when you hear things like distortion and stuff like that, it shows you, and it's almost like the sound is like reaching just beyond the actual limit to the recording and evoking something just that much more powerful. I picked this Wes Harrington clip because he's kind of a stand-up comedian from this clip is probably from the 80s, but what he will do is he will do sound effects into the mic, but listen for it, because he's mimicking all these ways that that old analog equipment would capture sound. The way he will imitate a gunshot sounds like an old Western 50s recording of a gunshot.
Cowboy's on his back with a Colt 45 shooting. Shoot, shoot, shoot.
Again, like
now the thunder.
Oh, here's the. So I'm showing that to, when you mimic the properties of saturation purposefully, you can kind of, you can suggest and subconsciously affect through history of hearing these things. Oh, that is loud, and So this, in a way, I feel my own thought is that this has trained all of our collective ways that we hear over multiple decades. And that the concept that distortion acts as a perceived loudness. You can have a quiet signal that is distorted, and your brain says that is loud and dangerous. Blah, blah, blah. So when you're simulating what the ears do themselves against these loud volumes with the technique of distorting them, you're sending these clues, which is exactly what we kind of did with this sequence. And the anecdote goes that, David is obviously a director who's made tons of movies for theatrical release. And the thing with theatrical release is it's kind of the Wild West. You don't have any, guidelines on how loud you can make it. You can push something insanely loud for a theatrical experience because every theater works where, okay, the theaters are all tuned to 85. When the director mixes in 85 dB, how loud he deems it to be loud, that's how loud it will be played back. But when you move to television, everyone has a volume control. People are turning things down. Some people have got babies sleeping in the other room. So when we were mixing this in David's studio at 85 dB, he was like, I want this really fucking loud, Dean. I want people's ears to bleed. And I'm thinking, well, it doesn't work that way. Like, we have, all the audience members have separate volume control. So that started my brain thinking, okay, that's what he wants. How can I get there? And that's where I started really thinking about that poetic use of distortion. So here's an example of what we did. And this is famously the hymn directing Trinity for victims of Hiroshima. But it's pushed, and those screens are pushed and distorted beyond the recording that we use. Again, I'm not playing this back pretty loud here, and this would be much louder in the cinema. But it gets the idea across that it's loud and dangerous. Probably also helps with just John exposure. Okay, so this is a little thing I like to show here. I'm not going to say too much about it. I'm just going to ingest it. It's very brief. Ingest it. Okay, so little newsreel, no big deal, but the sound that we heard there of the wind wasn't the original sound. That's just something I've added, and this is the source of that sound. So, the Beatles coming to America, and famously, like all the women screaming, and this is why the Beatles stopped touring, because the women were screaming so loud that it prevented the music from being heard. The old Altec speaker PAs of the time just couldn't compete with screaming adolescent women. And but this kind of concept and idea is the idea that sound, individual sound, recorded sound effects, capturing that sound, and okay, we have that. To me, I've always thought them as little packets of energy, and that's the cool thing about cinema. You can swap out. You want energy of that feeling to be for the blizzard and the intensity of the blizzard, and we can cross-pollinate these things. So yeah, we exploit that concept as much as possible in cinema. And then I'm going to follow that up with this.
I was in high school. I lived in Alexandria, Virginia. I was into rock and roll music, mainly Elvis Presley, who brought rock and roll music to the world, to me anyway. I ended up going to this concert. I didn't really have any idea that it was the first concert. I don't know. And I didn't have any idea how big this event was. And it was in a gigantic place where they had boxing matches. The Beatles were in the boxing ring. It was so loud you can't believe. Girls shuddering, crying, screaming their heart out. It was phenomenal.
So, again, this just is a great example of like how the artist, an artist's formative experience can crystallize and inform how they represent something, and they draw upon core memories, emotional experiences, and reach for those ingredients in order to impart a feeling that they're after. There's another anecdote from the Australian director George Miller, who also has a great prowess of film sound, and he recounts having the experience of sneaking underneath the Star Theater, a theater, Cineplex, not a Cineplex, a cinema palace in his local hometown, that for films that weren't suitable for children, he and his friends would sneak underneath the theater and simply hear the soundtrack. And he said that was enough to scare them and feel these things that they weren't allowed to see. And so I think it's interesting tracing these like origin stories and then how people go on to say, that's the experience I have. I want to give that experience to an audience. Okay, so that Beatles concept, we can transplant that to how sound acts, outside the visible frame and using different oral energy things to support the narrative and paint the external world, the existing world. Like example being like if you've got an interior scene, you're trying to give it clues to, is this a nice neighborhood? Is it a bad neighborhood? You can do that from just the type of dog sound effect you pick, whether it's a friendly residential dog or a vicious dog. Handling all these things, it's very similar across the board in film. When you have a set decoration, you have the prop master. What are the props saying about the characters? It's the same thing with sound. You're choosing every single sound to say, how does this inform the world of the film and paint the accurate vision that the director's trying to get across. But off-screen sound space, back to the Tati comical version. This is not a huge scene or anything, but this is from Twin Peaks season 3. But I just wanted to show this because it's a very odd employment of David's comedic sort of sensibilities. But I think this whole scene was just fabricated. It wasn't in the script, but I think he just held long on these guys sitting. They don't have any reaction to what's supposedly going on behind the corner. But at a certain point, David came to the sound team and he was like, there was just this huge long shot with nothing there. And he's like, we're gonna make a scene to go around the corner. So every sound you hear in the scene, it's basically the sound team. You'll hear myself screaming stuff. You'll hear Olivia, my assistant. You'll hear Ron Eng, the other mixer for the show. You'll hear Sabrina Sutherland, who produced the series. We basically just did this whole audio scene that David scratched out as a script, and it's the sound department acting in this scene.
I'll tell him. All right. Bye, Mom. Drive careful. Mom wants us to come to Sunday dinner. Hopes there's no murders this weekend. Fat chance that's gonna happen.
Piss on the floor! Get her out of here! She's still pissing, Bill! Cocksuckers! I'll shake your mouth! I'll get her. And she's got a knife! Twinkies! I'll cut your nuts out! Taser! Taser, Bill! Taser! Oh!
I'm going to keep going here because I want to get through the end of this. Okay, so stress, another big thing. This is another lever on the human physiology thing that we as sound practitioners can pull and manipulate. blah, blah. Let's see here. Okay, a couple key things. Prioritizing input under stress is something our bodies do very poorly. Well, poorly is the wrong word, but we can, when things get stressful, I think our natural physiology places the attention toward what we need. And I don't know if anybody else is experienced this, but like in terms of, people talk about car accidents where they'll say, time slowed down. I didn't hear anything, or everything got real quiet. And it's the body's way of sort of allocating, all that's rammed toward things like the visual and the time-based perception, because something's going wrong and you need to overcorrect, and the body acts very, very different under stress duress. And this is a trick that sometimes we employ in film mixing to kind of mimic that synaptic depression where it's reducing certain things. And what it does in terms of audio is, if there's a larger scape going on, maybe backgrounds of a crowd, and you depress that, subtly, you can kind of draw the audience into what the actor is saying and put a different emphasis on it.
We've met before, haven't we?
I don't think so. Where was it you think we met?
So it's a famous
It's your
scene.
house, don't you remember?
This is kind of, again, mimicked in Mulholland Drive. I'm not going to play this example because it's a little long, but I'm sure some of you have seen it. But like, this is a further example of that, where at the end of the scene, when he's walking towards the dumpster and the character emerges and gives him a shock, we have all the high frequency of the soundtrack suck out. Everything kind of goes into that subjective sort of warped reality thing. And in some ways, I think David was sort of subconsciously mimicking that physiological fear-based thing that happens when our bodies sort of short circuit. Let's see. So, magic and beyond. I think with Lynch in general, there's actually a large portion of the explainable sound world that is much more mysterious. He seemed to be both tapped in to a deeply universal source and align and be able to bring those working around him into this arena as well. It's something that I experienced firsthand. And the best way to describe this is in looking at how our universe is constructed, and the experience in our physical realm is entirely made of frequency, vibratory building blocks. This idea of frequency, I'm not talking just audio, but it's this huge spectrum of one frequency band that our physical realm gets divided up in, in terms of like, this sliver is visible color and what we can see. This sliver is audible to our ears. This sliver is actually radioactive and will distort and manipulate our bodies. There's even that sliver that's actual physical matter that we can touch. It's part of the frequency spectrum. It's one band. And Tesla had this famous quote: if you want to find the secrets to the universe, think in terms of this energy, frequency, and vibration. This is just a quick visual representation of cymatics, which is a whole sort of thing where they'll put salt on a metal plate that's connected to a speaker cone vibratory source, and as they vibrate different notes of the Western scale, you will get an equivalent geometric pattern, visualization, and this is like a great poetic linking of how sound and visual is linked. That these invisible waves that are vibrating around us indeed have a structure kind of dictated by Mother Nature, and there is a physical representation of it, which is like, again, going to the cinema, and the reason why the cinematic experience with the large crossover with fiberglass horns at 85 dB and giant, 20-inch subs, it's moving such sound pressure and vibrating our physical molecules, and we are like pools in Jurassic Park vibrating to what is actually happening on screen. So this is nature's code. It's a way of kind of copying and pasting and and things like DNA and snowflakes and crystals and flower petals and galaxy configurations. This repetition of the universe, I think it's a way for it to create these very complex displays from very, very economical and simple origins. And this is what I like to think about when you tune into the source material of an idea, or as David would talk about, catching an idea, and he would always talk about the idea containing everything you needed to know about the thing, and if you tune into that idea, if you kind of catch that, and if you're in a simpatico relationship with understanding it, that's how it talks to you. That's how you get clues and how to expand it, and what works and what doesn't with it. I'd like to show an example from Twin Peaks: The Return that epitomizes this concept. And this is actually a very rare thing that I only do in lectures. This is an original daily from the show, scene 574A, take 2. Now, this is not a crazy scene or anything, but this is a very unusual, pivotal scene toward the end of the series where Cooper, who is not even Cooper at this point, questionably, wakes up in this motel room after this experience with Diane and finds a note with totally different character names. Diane is now Linda, and it's addressed to Richard, who's supposed to be, Cooper's. So it's a very sort of a mysterious, like, what is happening here? Reality has shifted and molecules have rearranged. But anyways, I'm going to play the take.
Maybe don't find the note right away.
Okay.
Kind of look around the room a little bit and just wonder, what the hell, why is she not here? And then you find the note.
Yeah, good. That's good.
Set? Got the slate on?
Yes.
Now, we've got a large AC unit in this room. It's very similar to this. You don't hear a lot of stuff coming over in dailies in terms of abstract sound. But what I heard coming in this daily was the sound of the AC vent. I'm going to turn this way up. You hear that? Can you turn it way up? You hear it? It's almost like a choral effect.
Dear Richard. Richard. When you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't try to find me. I don't recognize you anymore. I'm sorry. Whatever it was we had together is over. Linda.
So that sound, hearing that come in dailies, that's just the production audio. Usually in dailies, you're just hearing the dialogue, and some scenes are almost comically under-supported because there is no sound but the dialogue. And many times, the sound team is trying to eradicate things like that. If it's a refrigerator going, they're trying to turn it off. They're trying to get the cleanest dialogue recording possible. But when I heard that scene, and being that it was kind of a charged, abstract scene in terms of like the story, my mind just did a backflip, and I'm thinking, that is a beautiful sound. And so what I did was I took that sound just as a presence for a room, because I thought it had a real kind of evocative, mysterious presence about it. And then I began to use that every time David was asking for something. I would use that source tone to make all these things, and it ended up getting copy and pasted throughout majority of the season. And so I've got a little montage here to just display, but all the tones you hear in this are all made from that source tone. And it was just a way where you're kind of threading this little sound throughout, and then you're starting to use it as signifiers, knowing that its core origin is this very mysterious, pivotal part at the end of the series. And you start to work it in everywhere. It's a sort of a comment. It's a way of bringing some other scenes that are related in harmony with that idea. So here's this montage of everywhere it was used. I'm changing the pitch every now and then. Some of them are really high.
It's him.
This is the water.
This is the tone distorted.
Now it's a boxing match again.
Would you sit back where you were?
Harmonizing the tone with itself.
I'm at the sheriff's station.
What the hell is that?
This keeps
Not
going on,
Troy.
but this I'm gonna wrap it up here because I know I'm going over. But just probably from the bird's eye view, this idea of a sonic thread throughout. This image is like the poetic sort of discovery as well. When David, when he was working with Angelo on season 3. Angela was in New Jersey, David was in LA, and we had their studios connected through Source Connect, so David could hear what Angela was playing in New Jersey at like full studio resolution, and I was getting MIDI information, and when I was going back, there was a part in the session where they were working on new ideas, but at the end David was like, well, let's just find a couple new sounds for Laura Palmer's theme, and play through that a couple times with some, just so we have them. So Angelo picked, like a synth tone, and then maybe a children's music box or something. There was like a couple different versions. So the Laura Palmer theme was played subsequently on the timeline, and I remember looking at the MIDI, and I had these 3 takes side by side, and I was like, wow, that really looks like a mountain range because it went up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And then I was like, wait a minute. And as I zoomed into one iteration of Laura Palmer's theme, I realized it just was twin peaks. It was just two peaks of this mountain range. And I'm thinking, holy shit. And, the way that composition was used in the original series, where it's woven throughout everything, very much like the harmonic tone I just showed you, that composition of the dual chord back and forth is woven through so much of the series that it's the DNA of the series. And seeing this, it was just like, holy mackerel, like, and again, unintentional. It's not like David was doing this in the way that like Aphex Twin was trying to embed images in his music from the 90s that you could see on a spectrograph or whatever. But like, this was crazy. And even showing this to David and Angelo, they had no idea. And I really meant to go back to the original session and find the exact recording of Laura Palmer's theme that this is. I don't have that, but this is the original. But you'll see, this version has the low bass note, which isn't how he played it in this version. So there's no demarcation of the bass note. There's just the pedal tone and the back and forth. And then as it climbs and does its thing, you've got peak 1. It goes back down to the fundamental mood, and then it climbs and ascends, and that's peak 2. And you've got a composition that, again, this represents from like when artists and practitioners are all tuned into that same core idea. Everybody is banging on all cylinders in a sort of a connective unity. And I think that's one of the things that David did so magically. And what I experienced working for him was he sort of brought people to that harmony in terms of what he was doing, and that I could almost do no wrong. It was like whatever I was doing was supportive and harmonizing with his original intent and the overall of the piece or the thing at play. But yeah, I mean, that to me, that sort of that whole thing represents a very, very deep kind of spiritual source to his art, and of course now, you know, with him having passed, I'm going to close with another Basho haiku, which is you know, such a great analogy for death, I think.
Never, oh never, nothing will die. The stream flows, the wind blows, the cloud fades, the heart beats.
For this lecture, but just seeing that image come in and how it's echoed in the last work for television that he did is kind of poetic and bookends that, you know, such a career over multiple decades. You have Elephant Man. He'd like to tell me that he was mixing Elephant Man when I was in diapers, and then you know, being able to work on the third season of Twin Peaks was still kind of bizarre in how time works. You know, when you're experiencing cinema and then you work for someone who's created the images that has sort of endowed you with a certain sensibility. But back to the title of this piece, Lonesome Foghorn Blows. It's what's really interesting, the anecdote about that whole thing and why I picked it as a title is it was never written in the script. That was an improvisational line that Jack Nance just said during that scene right before he found Laura's body wrapped in plastic, and you know, him just improvising that line. Again, it's the same thing. It's the same exact thing with the Laura Palmer theme. It's the people in concert of the collaboration that he's doing. He brings them to a unity source where their instincts are right, and that sort of characterizes my experience. And yeah, that's everything I have.